Buddhāvataṃsaka Sutra. Book 39. Entry into the Realm of Reality. Video 29. Just as space, extensive as the cosmos, is without discrimination whether worlds become, decay, or disappear, is by nature pure, undefiled, neither turning back nor tiring, not long or short, eternally supporting all lands. In the same way the space of the will and knowledge of the enlightening being, with the whirlwind of great vows, never tires in keeping sentient beings from falling into all states of misery, has no fear in leading them to the paths of felicity, is not exhausted in setting them on the ways to omniscience, does not follow afflictions, and is not stained by the ills of the mundane world. Just as a magically produced man has all his limbs and body parts but lacks 10 physical elements, inhalation and exhalation, coolness and warmth, hunger and thirst, joy and sorrow, the pains of birth, old age, sickness, and death, in the same way, in the enlightening being whose form is born of the magic of knowledge, whose body is one with the cosmos, who appears in all states of existence to perfect sentient beings, who lives through all ages, 10 things are not to be found: desire for the mundane world, rejection of life in the mundane, currying of enjoyment of objects, malevolence, desire for enjoyment, the burning of afflictions, experiences of painful feelings, fear of difficult situations, desire for existence, and attachment. I will tell you more, by the power of Buddha, to increase the power of vows of enlightening beings of the future. In the very remote past there was a world called Jewel Light. In that world was an age called Beautiful Light. In that age 10,000 Buddhas appeared. The first of those Buddhas was one called King Illumining Space with the voice of truth, who was one of those who has arrived at thusness, perfectly enlightened, consummate in knowledge and action, arrived at felicity, supreme knower of the world, tamer of humans, teacher of humans and gods, a blessed Buddha. That Buddha appeared not far from a capital city called Array of Delights, in the middle of the 4 continents of the world. East of that city was a forest called Beautiful Light, in which there was an enlightenment site called Cloud of Jewel Flowers. At that site a lion thrown in the calyx of a lotus of radiant jewels appeared, and this is where that Buddha realized supreme perfect enlightenment. At that time the human lifespan was 10,000 years. Now, there being many who were set in evil ways, killing, stealing, raping, lying, foul and harsh in speaking, divisive, covetous, malicious, and deluded, the Buddha sat at the site of enlightenment for a full 1,000 years and taught enlightening beings, world leaders, and people who had served past Buddhas in order to mature people's existing roots of good. At that time there was a king called Victorious Light in that capital city Array of Delights. He had thrown many hundreds of thousands of criminals and evildoers into prison to discipline them, thieves, killers, rapists, liars, abusive and violent people, troublemakers, greedy people, malicious people, people obsessed with aberrant ideas, people addicted to unlawful pleasures, people overcome by desire for ill-gotten gains, people involved in false cults, evildoers, people who had committed violence, people who had done no good, people who had neglected to come to the aid of those in danger and fear, people without respect for their parents or for mendicants, priests, and holy people. The king had a son named Conqueror, who had 28 of the marks of a great man, and lived in the palace surrounded by many graceful women. He heard the frightful cries of those who were bound up in prison. Agitated and upset by these cries, moved with compassion, he left the palace and went into the prison, where he saw those people cast into the dungeons, bound by all sorts of fetters and shackles, chained together and thrown into the darkness, shrouded in smoke, exposed to unhealthy draughts, emaciated, hungry and thirsty, naked and homeless, filthy and unkempt, being subjected to various tortures, screaming in pain. Seeing the prisoners, the prince was inspired with great compassion and an unprecedented determination to help others. He comforted the prisoners, intending to deliver them from their bonds. Giving them assurance, he went to the king and said, "Know, O king, that I have given assurance to the people in prison. Please set them free." The king called his 500 ministers together and asked them what they thought about this. They said, "These people are plunderers of the royal treasuries, attackers of the king, arrested entering the royal palace. They should be executed. Furthermore, anyone who wants to save them is also guilty of crime against the king." The prince, overwhelmed with great compassion, said to those ministers, "Let it be as you say. Just release these convicts, I can endure all pains for their sake. Whatever you would do to them, do to me. To free them from bondage I will undergo all kinds of torture and give up my body and life. Why? If I cannot liberate these people from bondage, how can I liberate those who are bound to the world, who are tied up by the ropes of craving, who are in the abyss of ignorance, who are cast into the darkness of delusion, who suffer the pains of poverty, who have fallen into the depths of evil ways, who act senselessly, whose minds are confused, who see no way to emancipation, who are without illumination, who are attached to the world, who lack virtue and knowledge, who have lost their faculties of knowledge, whose minds are tainted with various afflictions, who are flung in the mud of suffering, who are under the control of demons, who are tormented by birth, old age, death, grief, lamentation, misery, depression, and sorrow?" Then the prince released all those prisoners from their bonds, by giving up himself, his whole retinue, and all his wealth. Freeing them, he removed all that was torturing them once and for all. At that point the 500 ministers, up in arms, went to the king and said, "Know that the law of the king has been broken by the will of the prince, and all of our lives are uncertain. If you do not punish the prince, your own life will not last long." The king, enraged, set out to kill his son and those convicts as well. The queen, hearing of this, was very upset, her hair undone, her jewelry and makeup removed. She went to the king with 1,000 of her ladies, beating her breast and throwing dust on her head, weeping and wailing. She said to him, "Let the prince go free, let him live." The king turned to the prince and said, "Give up on these criminals. If you do not, you will die for their sake." The prince, facing death, was not fazed, being focused on omniscience, dedicated to the welfare of others, guided by great compassion. The queen, his mother, asked the king to allow a fortnight for observation, let the prince give people whatever they need for half a month, Then do whatever you want with him." The king agreed to this. North of the city there was a large park called Sunlight that had been made in the past as a sacrificial ground. The prince went there and gave to anyone who asked whatever they needed. Thus for half a month he freely gave away various goods, food, clothing, utensils, and so on, to whoever needed them. Then, on the last day of the fortnight, the whole population gathered the king, his ministers, his women, the grantees, the landlords, the townspeople, and all the religious impostors. Now the Buddha king, illumining space with the voice of truth, realizing it was an opportune time to teach people, went to that sacrificial ground, respectfully surrounded by celestial and spiritual beings. The crowd of people, and the prince, saw the Buddha coming from afar, serene, pleasant to see, senses calm, mind quiet, self-control-led, master of his faculties, tranquil as an elephant, clear as a pool of water, purified, undefiled, miraculously radiating light by the great power of a Buddha, overpowering with the mastery of a Buddha, shining with the magnificence of a Buddha, adorned with the marks and embellishments of a Buddha, pervading all worlds with the light of his aura, illuminating them with rays of light, emanating orbs of fragrant jewel fire from every pore, causing all worlds to quake with the quaking of a Buddha land, destroying all beings' afflictions, coming forth as a Buddha, raining multitudes of all kinds of supernal manifestations, bearing himself as a Buddha, increasing the flow of joy in all beings, conveying the power of the sight of a Buddha. Seeing the Buddha thus, everyone's mind became clear and serene. Then the prince and the people, going out to meet the Buddha, their minds clear, prostrated themselves before the Buddha, made offerings of many kinds, and said, "Welcome, welcome, Blessed One. The Buddha has turned his attention to us, the Buddha has bestowed his favor on us." Then the prince pointed out a seat of honor to the Buddha and said, "Please sit down, O Blessed One, this seat has been prepared." Then, as the Buddha approached, the gods of purity, by the power of the Buddha, changed it into a calyx of a lotus of fragrant diamonds. The Buddha sat on it, and enlightening beings sat on surrounding seats. As soon as they saw the Buddha, everyone in the assembly was relieved of afflictions and obstruction and disturbance, and became fit vessels for the holy teachings. Then the Buddha, knowing that those people had become capable of receiving the teaching, gave them a systematic talk. He expounded to them a scripture called Illumination of the Multitude of Causes, including all elements of the teaching, which he spoke in the languages of all people. At that, 80 million people in that crowd attained dispassionate, pure, objective vision of things. Many millions reached the stage beyond learning. 10,000 were led to the great vehicle, introduced to the way of fulfillment of the great vows of universally good enlightening action. Thus, as the Buddha turned the wheel of teaching by the great miraculous power of Buddhas, as many beings as atoms in 100,000 Buddha lands in the 10 directions came to the guidance of the great vehicle. An infinite variety of beings in the interrelated Buddha lands in the worlds of the 10 directions put an end to evil. Countless beings were established in the way to paradise. And as for the prince, he attained this enlightening liberation made of roots of goodness, fostering the perfection of all beings according to their mentalities. Now then, you may think that the prince in that time, who gave up his body and life, his wealth and retinue, and all human pleasures, in order to liberate those people from bondage, was somebody else. Who was it who made that great sacrifice without reservations? Who won the favor of the Buddha of that time? Who resolved to attain perfect enlightenment when he saw the Buddha? Who attained this enlightening liberation made of roots of goodness, fostering the development of all beings according to their mentalities? It was none other than I myself who was that prince in that time. As that prince, overwhelmed by great compassion, set on the welfare of all beings, unattached to the things of the world, desiring only perfection, with no wish for glory, fame, or repute, not elevating myself, not degrading others, unattached to things, without any notion of existence, without desire for anything in the world, material or immaterial, indifferent to the pleasures of the world, attentive to the sphere of the enlightened, purely intent on enlightenment, having developed an indomitable will, benevolent toward all living beings, compassionately resolved to quell the suffering of all beings, intent on the power of the enlightened, purifying the path of enlightenment, preparing the paths of emancipation of the great vehicle, contemplating the path to omniscience, I did these difficult deeds. This is how long ago I attained this liberation. And who do you think those 500 ministers were, who unjustly incited the king to execute me? They were none other than 500 people whom Devadatta incited to kill the Buddha. The Buddha subsequently guided them and foretold their enlightenment, predicting that in the future, after as many eons as atoms in a polar mountain, in an age called Good Light, there would be 500 Buddhas with Buddhalands of various qualities, born of various races, tribes, and families, showing various miracles at birth, undergoing various spiritual transmutations on leaving society, manifesting various lights at the tree of enlightenment, approaching the pinnacle of enlightenment in various ways, showing various ways of destroying demons, showing various miracles on attainment of enlightenment, articulating various terms for the principles of their teachings, expounding various scriptures, speaking various languages, surrounded by various audiences, emanating various auras of light, having various lifespans, their teachings to remain for various lengths of time, their teachings variously circulating, and their names to be various, all embodiments of great compassion. The first Buddha of the age to attain supreme enlightenment in the world jewel light would be one named Great Compassionate One, the second would be named Moon of Commitment to the welfare of all beings, the third would be Lion of Great Compassion, the fourth would be Desirous of the welfare of all beings, and the last one would be Supreme Healer. Who do you think those criminals of that time were, doomed to die, whom I released from bondage by sacrificing my life? They were none other than the Buddhas of the present age, virtue, beginning with Krakuchanda, and countless millions of other enlightening beings who were inspired to seek enlightenment by seeing the Buddha resolution born of the glory of the proclamation of endless power, and are now carrying out enlightenment practice throughout the universe, and are cultivating and extending this enlightening liberation born of roots of goodness, aiding the development of all beings according to their mentalities. Who do you think the victorious light of that time was? It was none other than the great debater Satyaka. And who do you think were the retinue and servants of the king, but the 60,000 philosophers whom Satyaka brought to the Buddha to debate, and whom the Buddha predicted would become enlightened and appear in the world as Buddhas with variously arrayed Buddhalands, in various ages, with various names. To continue, the prince, conqueror, given permission by his parents, after having released the prisoners, gave up his great wealth and family and went to the Buddha. For 5,000 years thereafter he cultivated spiritual practice, during which time he perfected 10,000 concentration methods, attained 10,000 ways of mental command, entered into 10,000 channels of mystic knowledge, attained 10,000 great treasuries of enlightening beings, produced 10,000 currents of momentum toward omniscience, purified 10,000 facets of tolerance, carried out 10,000 contemplations, developed 10,000 bodies of power of enlightening beings, entered 10,000 doors of knowledge of enlightening beings, produced 10,000 ways to transcendent wisdom, became aware of 10,000 channels of conscious vision of thousands of Buddhas, and accomplished 10,000 vows of enlightening beings. With these realizations, in each mental moment he went to 10,000 Buddha lands in the 10 directions, and in each moment of thought remembered 10,000 Buddhas past and future in each world. And he perceived 10,000 multitudes of emanations of those Buddhas radiating throughout the 10 directions. In each moment of thought he saw all the beings in 10,000 Buddha lands, passing away and coming to life in various states, undeveloped and developed, felicitous and miserable, of good and bad appearance, following their desires. And he understood the passing away and coming to life of those beings, as well as the revolving of their minds, the conduct of their minds, the continuity of their thoughts, the variety of their inclinations, the multitude of their faculties, the courses of their endeavors, their habits of action, and the proper timing to develop and guide them. Subsequently the prince passed away from there and was reborn in the same city array of delights, in the same royal family, and attained sovereign rulership. As the king, following the demise of the Buddha king illumining space with the voice of truth, he propitiated a Buddha named Glorious King risen in the sky of truth. After that, at that same enlightenment site, having become a chief god, he propitiated a Buddha named Sanctuary of Celestial Rulers. After that, in the same world, having become a celestial chief of the heaven of timely portion, he propitiated a Buddha named Fiery Energy of the Radiant Mountain of Mental Command. After that, having become a celestial chief of the heaven of satisfaction in the same world, he propitiated a Buddha named King proclaiming the light of the wheel of the teaching. After that, having become a celestial chief of the heaven of good emanation in the same world, he propitiated a Buddha named King like the moon in the sky. After that, having become a celestial chief of the heaven of command of others' emanations in the same world, he propitiated a Buddha named Paragon of Indestructible Power. After that, having become a chief Brahma god in the same world, he propitiated a Buddha called Sound of Projections of the Wheel of Teaching reflected everywhere. Beginning with these, 10,000 Buddhas emerged in the age-beautiful light in the world jewel light, all of whom were propitiated by the Prince Conqueror. Following that age-beautiful light was an age called subtle light. In that age I was a king called Great Wisdom. As a king, I propitiated a Buddha named Glorious Mountain of Marks of Greatness. Next, in the same age, as a householder I propitiated a Buddha named Restrained in Body and Mind. Next, in the same age, as a government minister, I propitiated a Buddha named Undefiled Child. Next, in the same age, as a Titan chief, I propitiated a Buddha named Holder of Energy. Next, in the same age, as a tree spirit, I propitiated a Buddha named Polar Mountain of Marks of Greatness. Next, in the same age, as a caravan leader, I propitiated a Buddha named Undefiled Arms. Next, in the same age, as a city spirit, I propitiated a Buddha named Walking Boldly as a Lion. Next, in the same age, as a God of Riches, I propitiated a Buddha named Crown of the Lord of Gods. Next, in the same age, as a celestial musician, I propitiated a Buddha named Spiritual Renown. Next, in the same age, as a goblin chief, I propitiated a Buddha named Crown of Light. In this way, I propitiated 60 million Buddhas in the age of subtle light, beginning with these 10. I honored and served those Buddhas in various forms of existence, and as I went to each Buddha I matured countless beings for supreme perfect enlightenment. And as I went to each Buddha I attained various concentrations, various mental commands, various accomplishments, various types of specialized knowledge, various perspectives on truth, various operations of knowledge, various perceptions of the totality of realms, various awarenesses of the totality of lands, various perceptions of the totality of visions of Buddha. All these I entered into, purified, enlarged, and devoted my attention to from start to finish. And just as I propitiated the Buddhas in the age of subtle light, so did I propitiate all the Buddhas who arose in as many eons as atoms in all oceans of worlds and came from other worlds and taught, and I listened to their teaching and remembered it. I have retained all their teachings, and from all of those Buddhas I got this enlightening liberation born of roots of goodness aiding the development of all beings according to their mentalities, by various means of attainment and by various ways of liberation. Then the night goddess spoke these verses to Sadhana elucidating this liberation. This supreme liberation is inconceivable. Resolute, you ask me about it. Listen as I tell you all, by the power of the Buddha. Endless, vast, inconceivable eons ago, countless worlds away, there was a pleasant world called Jewel Light. There was an age called Beautiful Light, in which numberless Buddhas emerged. I propitiated those supreme sages as I cultivated this liberation. There was a great and glorious metropolis there called a Ray of Delights in which there lived both pure-minded people and evildoers. The king there was Victorious Light, who ruled his people justly. His son was called Conqueror, a fine man with the marks of greatness. Thousands of offenders had been condemned to death by the king. Seeing them, the prince was seized with compassion and asked the king to release them. Hearing this, the king called his ministers and told them all about it. They all said, bowing to the king, "He is out to destroy you." Incited by the ministers, the king hastened to kill the prince. Undismayed, indifferent to his own death, the prince did not abandon the convicts. Grieved to hear the prince was condemned, the queen and the palace ladies asked the king to free the prince for a fortnight to give all kinds of gifts to the people. Granted permission by the king, the prince made gifts of all that was asked for, day and night, for half a month, giving charity to all who came. whatever the needy required, that he gave them, prepared for death. The whole population of the city came out, lamenting the fate of the prince. Then the Buddha at the enlightenment tree, illumining space with the voice of truth, realizing people's faculties were ripe, went to that sacrificial ground out of compassion. Going there, the Buddha produced a miraculous display and expounded a scripture, the voice of the teaching as myriad lamps of truth. Countless people were edified, and the Buddha foretold their enlightenment. The Prince Conqueror, enraptured, set out for supreme enlightenment. The prince gave the Buddha many offerings and joyfully said, "May I become a guide, savior, refuge, and resort for the people of the land." He left home to join the Buddha, seeking the path of perfect enlightenment. He spent hundreds of eons thoroughly investigating the essence of things. Pitying all the helpless ones fallen into the sea of suffering, having cultivated the path of enlightenment, he attained this liberation. All the Buddhas in that age he propitiated with pure faith. He made great offerings to them and kept their teachings in mind. After that, for eons numerous as atoms in oceans of lands, he propitiated and made offerings to all the Buddhas that arose. I was the Prince Conqueror, who, seeing people imprisoned, gave up my body to free them and thus attained this liberation. I cultivated it for eons as many as atoms in oceans of lands, expanding it moment by moment through endless incomparable means. From all the Buddhas I saw I gained some realization and was shown this liberation by a succession of means. From them I learned the inconceivable reality of liberation over countless eons, imbibing all at once the multitude of teachings projected by the Buddhas when established therein. Those established therein go everywhere without attachment, instantly comprehending the countless names and groups of past, present, and future. They appear before all the multitudes of Buddhas of all times, manifesting themselves in the presence of those Buddhas as reflected images. They go everywhere and appear before all the Buddhas, showering all kinds of ornaments as offerings to the Buddhas. Then they ask the myriads of Buddhas multitudes of questions and remember the infinite teachings poured forth by the Buddhas. They go to the circles of Buddhas everywhere, as far as they can see, sitting on seats of many forms, manifesting various miracles. With bodies of infinite appearances, they fill all realms, by the thousands. They show an endless variety of forms, and all those forms in one. From each pore they emanate countless multitudes of light rays and extinguish the fire of afflictions of all beings by various means. In this state, emanating myriad projected bodies from each and every pore, they pervade all realms with them and guide beings with rain from the ocean of truth. This way of enlightenment, with inconceivable forms, is the resort of all enlightenment beings. Based on this they carry out practices in all lands for all time. Expounding the teaching according to mentalities, they remove the web of views. Dwelling in ultimate felicity, they show people the stage of omniscience. With inconceivably many bodies of endless forms in all states of existence, they teach according to mentality, their forms reflections of all beings. So many and infinitely more, as inconceivably many as atoms in all lands, are the oceans of manifestations of the fearless ones when they have attained this peaceful liberation. The goddess continued, I know only this enlightenment liberation born of roots of goodness fostering the development of all beings according to their mentalities. How can I know the practice, or comprehend the oceans of virtues, or completely know the power of knowledge, or know the realm of thought, or understand the mastery of concentration, or recognize the miracle of liberation, of the enlightenment beings who have transcended all worldly courses, who appear as reflections in all states of being, who are intent on shattering the mountains of barriers to omniscience, who know the nature and characteristics of all things, who are engaged in dispelling the darkness of all barriers caused by afflictions, who are skilled in carrying out a thorough investigation of all things, who actually realize the knowledge of selflessness, who ceaselessly develop and guide all sentient beings, who really know the principle of the non-dual reality realm, whose intellects encompass the ocean of all manners of verbal expression. In the Lumbini Grove, here on Jambudvipa, there lives a goddess of the Lumbini Grove named Sutejomantalarati. Go ask her how enlightening beings are born in the lunali of Buddhas, how they become light makers for the world, and how they carry on the practice of enlightening beings forever without wearying. Then Sudhana paid his respects to the night goddess Sarvajagadreksha Pranitana Viryaprabha and left. Continue to video 30.